Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah Daf Chet. Chodesh Tov to everybody. Today's stuff is sponsored by Aviran and Mickey Kadosh on the occasion of their son Abishai's bar mitzvah and in honor of him completing Shas Mishnayot, Masechet Tamid, and Masechet Tanit during the past year. We wish that you continue to persevere in learning to advance and grow wise in all your hobbies and areas of interest. Mazal Tov. Today's stuff is sponsored by Caroline Ben Ari for the refuah shlema of Shaul Ram Ben Rivka. Today's stuff is sponsored anonymously to all the women who have served as my role models for Jewish learning. Okay, we're going to get started. We were in the middle of Nahum Hamadi. If you remember, we started with, how we get there? Let's remember. We started with a Mishnah. Machloket Rabbi Yishmael and the rabbis about, is it 3 days before and after, or is it just before and not after? And then we said, well, the rabbis who say just before, it sounds exactly the same as the Tanakama in the first Mishnah. What's the difference between them? We suggested 4 possible differences. After going through all the differences, the last one was suggesting that perhaps the rabbis in the Mishnah were adopting the position of the Chum Hamadi, who basically had said it's only 1 day before the holidays, you can't do business dealings with them. And then, apropos of that, the Gemara went into the statement of Nahum Hamadi about the 1 day and how basically the rabbis totally disagree with him and said, Nishtaka davar v'lo ne'emal, his word should be buried and should never be stated. And then went through a whole slew of other statements of Nahum Hamadi to which the rabbis responded with the same thing. So then Rabbi Acha Bar Yomi said to Abai, I don't understand. This guy comes from Madi, and then he comes, and and he says he's a born a prominent person, and then he gets here, and basically we knock down everything he said. And Abai said, well, there was one thing we agreed with, which we're going to get into, and then the Rabbi Acha Bar Yomi says that's not because it was Nahum Hamadi. You said it. That's because he was dependent on bigger rabbis. It was really because he was holding by this very well held position, and that's why they held like him. But really, we're left with it's really strange that they knocked out everything he said and kind of in a disrespectful manner by saying this should be buried and never said again. Okay, there's no answer really to Rav Acha's question, but in any case, we're right now in the middle of the sugya of the case where we ended up actually, yes, holding like him. We haven't even seen his opinion yet. So far, we've seen there's 2 opinions, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, about how a person should daven. Should they first ask their personal requests and then daven, or should they first daven and then ask their personal requests? And then we said they each kind of used a pasuk, but then we explained each pasuk in the opposite manner, and then showed the pasukim are not really where we get the debate. And that's where we ended yesterday, saying, what do they really argue about? They argue about this statement of Rabbi Simlai, who basically a very famous statement that one should always praise God first and then daven. And where do we learn it? From Moshe Rabbeinu, who when he asked God, can I go into the land? First, he sets out the praise of God, and then he asks for his request. So now, how do we get a machloket from there? That's what we're going to start today at the very top of our daf. Rabbi Yeshua Savar Yalfina Mi Moshe. So that's obvious. Rabbi Yeshua says we learn from Moshe. First, he praised God, then he asked for what he wanted. Rabbi Eliezer Savar Lo Yalfina Mi Moshe. Shani Moshe Derav Guvri. Moshe is different. Moshe is a prominent person. He was allowed to do that. But anyone else who does that, it looks like what we call Yehoha. It looks like they're being arrogant. Okay, it's like we always, when I learned this as a kid, right? This is why we learn, why we start off with the first 3 brachot of Shemona Esrei, praising God. And it's like when you ask your parents for something, first you praise them, then you say, oh, can I have the keys to the car or whatever it might be that you're looking for. And when you think about it, it looks a little bit phony, right? And perhaps only Moshe Rabbeinu was allowed to do that because he was very genuine and he was an important, prominent person. But if we do it, maybe it looks more like that kind of ingenuous type of situation. So that's why Rabbi Eliezer says we don't learn from Moshe at all. We learn what Moshe did, only Moshe could do, not anyone else. And now comes the compromise position. Lo kedivrei zeh v'lo kedivrei zeh. It's not like this one and not like that one. Ela sho'el adam tzrachav b'shomei tefillah. We do it in the middle of our tefillah, basically. And when we say shomei tefillah, God should hear our prayers, that's where we add the individual requests. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Bar Shmuel, halacha sho'el adam tzrachav b'shomei tefillah, and then we get that is in fact the halacha. And again, this is why we say we end up holding like Nahum Hamadi, because really they're holding by the position of the rabbis. Okay, he's holding by the position of the rabbis, and after that, Rav and Shmuel both hold like him. And now, because of this, we're going to get off a little on a tangent about adding in personal request, Shiur Shmona Esrei. Amar Rav Yehuda Brei de Rav Shmuel bar Shilat, Mishmei de Rav. So again, Rav Yehuda, this is a different Rav Yehuda, the son of Rav Shmuel bar Shilat, who says in the name of Rav, even though we say you're supposed to add it in Shomei Tefillah, which is the last of the middle brachot in Shemona Esrei, but if you want to add in a particular request within any of the particular brachot that has to do with that bracha, you can obviously do that. Or he says you can do it. I don't know if it's obvious, but now it's obvious because he said it and we know we do this. And we're now going to get even some more details about it. Even though it says specifically add things in Shomei Tefillah, if there's a sick person in their household, or you want to pray for anybody who's sick, Omer b'berkat cholim, you add in a request specifically in Rifa'enu. Ve'im tzarich leparnasa, if you need a request for sustenance, for parnasa, Omer b'berkat hashanim, you add it in v'tein bracha pnei adama, that God should bless the land. That was agriculture. That was their survival. That's what they lived on. So add it into that blessing. Amar Rabbi Shoban Levi, Afa Pisha Omer, Sha'amru Shoel Adam Shachab Shomei Tefillah, Im Ba Lomar Achar Tfilato, Afilu Keseder Yom Kippurim Omer. So Rabbi Shoban Levi adds that even though it says add in Shomei Tefillah, if you add at the end of your Tefillah, that also works like Yom Kippur. Now, here they say even like the Seder of Yom Kippur. So what do they mean by that? So most of the commentaries say what they mean is the length. If you want to add, what do we do on Yom Kippur? We add in the vidoy at the end of davening, okay? And it's very long. So even if you want to have a long, long davening there and add in a lot of personal requests, you can do that even as long as Yom Kippur at the end of your tefillah. Another way to look at it is that they're saying, like we do on Yom Kippur, that we add at the end, that can provide us a model for how we do it if we want to add our own requests. Okay, so you can do it. It seems like they're giving you two different possibilities, either at the end or during Shomei Tefillah. Now we're going to move on to the next Mishnah. We're now going to have a list. We can't do business dealings with Gentiles before their holidays, so the Mishnah wants to tell us what are their holidays. Okay, for a really good article about the details of these holidays, and we're going to see that there's different opinions, okay, or more so if you read Shuli's article in Flashback this week, it's all about the different Roman holidays of their time, and different opinions about what the nature of these holidays were. The Babli gives us one, in the Rishonim there's some different versions, there's some historical pieces that she brings up, so it's a good article to get some background on these holidays. Okay, so these are apparently Roman holidays that were at the time. We're going to read them now. Elu edehem shel Yovdei Kochavim. So here are the holidays of the Yovdei Kochavim. Kalenda, Usaturnina, Ve'katesim, Ve'yom Ginusya shel Malachim, Ve'yom Alida, Ve'yom Amita, Divrei Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir lists a bunch of these holidays. Kalenda Saturnura, which we learned yesterday, are the 8 days, or maybe 2 days ago, I can't remember now, but the 8 days before the winter solstice and the 8 days after the winter solstice. And we're going to talk about what the nature of that holiday is, or those holidays are. They're 8 days before, 8 days after. And Kratesim, which we're going to get to what that is. The Yom Ginusi Shel Malachim, that we're going to get to much later, not in today's daf, on daf Yud. Yom Aleida and Yom Amita, this seems to be the birthday and the day of death of, seems to be the king, although I will tell you right now, without getting into all the details, there's a debate, because we're going to see a whole bunch of other things in this Mishnah. There's a huge debate among the Rishonim as to where in the Mishnah do we move from the king to personal holidays. Okay, because at some point we clearly move to personal holidays. Some people already think Yom Aleida and Yom Amita relate to personal holidays of people, okay, like within the family or something like that. But it's unclear. It does seem to be more likely that we're still talking about the king. At some point we switch. There's many different opinions at which point in the Mishnah we switch from the king to a more personal thing. Anyway, this is the list that Rabbi Meir has. Chachamim omrim kol mita sheyesh ba sreifa yesh ba avodah zarah v'she'en ba sreifa ein ba avodah zarah. If when someone dies, there's a sreifa connected with it, a burning. What is this? So sometimes it's a burning of some people say, there's debate here, the burning of the objects of the person. Okay, if they burn the objects of the person, that's that connects with idol worship. If they don't burn the items, again, this could be a person, this could be the king possibly. If they burn the items of the king, then that's Avodah Zarah related. If not, it's not. Okay, so they disagree with Rabbi Meir. It's not every Yom HaMitah of the king. Let's just assume we're talking about the king still. It's only if they burn things. Some people say it's the burning of incense, not burning in general, but burning of incense. Okay, if they burn, and it's not burning items, but burning incense. If they burned incense on the day of the death of the king, then that's Avodah Zarah, and if not, it's not Avodah Zarah. אבל יום תגלחת זקנו ובלוריתו, ויום שעלה בו מן הים, ויום שיצא מבית אסורים, ועובר כוכבים שעשה משתה לבנו, אינו אסור אלא אותו היום ואותו האיש בלבד. So now we have to go through this list, and again, remember, keep in mind, it's unclear where we pass from the king to an individual, but Yom, the day he shaves his beard, and the day he gets his haircut. Okay, so again, could be the king, could be an individual person, or a day he got back from a long journey in the water, on the rivers, on the sea. Yom she'yatzah mibeit asurim, the day he got out of jail. And ovei kochavim. Now here, notice it's the first time they say ovei kochavim. Here, this supports the opinion that only from here we go to the individual, and before that we were talking about the king, but not necessarily. But an individual that does a party for his son for his wedding. So all those cases, it's only oto hayom, it's only that day, not the previous days or the days after, and oto ha'ish bavad. And it's only business dealings with that particular person, not with anybody else. Okay, these are not national holidays. So again, maybe it's the king's shaving and the king's haircut are not national holidays as opposed to his day of death was, or perhaps we're talking about individuals in general who shave, who, get haircuts. Again, that would be weird to think everyone made a holiday on those kind of days. It's hard to understand exactly again, which is talking about the king, which is not, and when we switch from there to individual. Amar Rav Chanan bar Rava. Kalenda shmona yamim achar tkufa. So now we get to the Gemara, and they start to tell us what's the nature of these holidays. And this we saw already. Kalenda is 8 days before the tkufa. Saturnuna is shmona yamim lifnei tkufa, is 8 days before the winter solstice. By the way, kalenda is, Shuli pointed out in her article, is from calendar. Okay, and it could be also relating to the first day of the month, right? Like the new year, which, by the way, I thought was interesting. We're on Rosh Chodesh right now, right? Not the same first day, but okay. V'simanech, how do you remember the order of which one goes before and which one goes after? Well, achor v'kedem tzartani. Right? They were created first back and then front, meaning achar is after, achor is after, kedem is before. So the order of the Mishnah is the first one, kalenda, is the one after the tkufa, after the solstice, and the other one is before. Now, why are there holidays around the winter solstice? And now we get to a very famous story. Tanu Rabbanan. Lefi shera'a Adam harishon yom shemitma'et v'olech. So Adam harishon, imagine, right? Man is created. And then what happens? The first year, they get to the winter, and the days are getting shorter and shorter. Amar oili shema b'shvil shesarachti. Maybe because I sinned, olam chashuch ba'adi. The world is getting dark on me, and chozer l'tov v'avo. Maybe God is undoing the creation of the world, right? It's this feeling like the world is about to end. V'zohu mitashin iknesa alayim min hashamayim, and this is the death that's decreed upon me. This type of death, how every day is going to get shorter and shorter until the whole world blackens out on me. Amav yashav shmona yamim b'ta'anit, so he fasted for 8 days, vit'u b'tfilah, and with praying. Kevan shar'at kufat tevet v'ra'a yom shmarich v'olech, he got to the winter solstice and realized that the days were getting longer. Amar minago shel olam, then he understood that this is just the way of the world. Halach v'asah shmona yamim tovim, he made a holiday of 8 days, and that explains the 8 days after. What about the 8 days before? Well, l'shana ha'acheret, the next year, asa'an le'elu le'elu yamim tovim. Then he made the 8 days before, and he had previously fasted and prayed. That turned into an 8-day holiday, and the 8 days after turned into an 8-day holiday. Hu kva'am l'shem shamayim, v'hen kva'um l'shem avodah zarah. Now, how do we get to the Romans and the avodah zarah? Because Adam HaRishon, this is a universal holiday. Theoretically, it should relate to us as well. So he did it for the right reasons, but eventually it became a holiday that they used for idol worship. And therefore, it's a holiday that we have to avoid. Now, some scholars try to connect Hanukkah to here as well. That's why we have an 8-day holiday, right? Obviously, we have other reasons why we have the Hanukkah holiday. But some scholars try to connect this concept to the Hanukkah holiday, right? That almost every religion has a holiday in the middle of the winter that connects with this, right? That's why it's a holiday of lights, also connects with this idea of the light. Anyway, there's a lot to be said there. Okay, now we're going to see the same kind of story. 1 second. So now, right, before we get to there, now we say, Bishlam alaman damar b'tishrei nivra ha'olam. There's a big famous machlok. Was the world created in Tishrei or was it created in Nisan? So if you say b'tishrei nivra ha'olam, so Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, right, you get 3 months later, right, Yomi zute chaza, Yomi ariche akata lo chaza. So basically, right, every day from the creation, the days were getting shorter and shorter, and Adam Rishon had never seen longer days. So you can understand why he would have thought that. But if you say the world was created in Nisan, you already saw there were shorter days and longer days, right? They went through the summer, and then the days got shorter again. They were shorter before the summer. There was already, Adam Rishon had seen a cycle of change in the days. He should have figured this out already. Well, no, but he hadn't gotten to the winter yet. Even if the world was created in Nisan, it hadn't been the dead of winter yet, and the days had never been that short. And when they got to be that short, Adam Rishon thought, this is the end of the world. Okay, now we're going to have a similar type of midrash, but having to do with the first day of creation. Tanu Rabbanit, Yom Shenivra bo Adam Rishon, which is attributed that besides that Adam was created, right, Chava was also created, and the sin happened on that day, all in one day. So then what happens? Adam sees that that the sun is setting. Amar oily, he said again the same thing according to this. Because I sinned, olam chashuch ba'adi v'yachzor olam letov avo, is God going to undo all of creation? Zoe mitashin knesala min hashamayim, and this must be my punishment from God. Haya yoshevu bochek kol halayla, he sat there crying all night. V'chava bochek kenegdo, and she's crying right next to him. Kevan shalam shachar, once the sun started to rise in the morning, amar min we realized this is the way of the world, right? It's funny, these things we take for granted, right? These are famous stories that are saying, don't take it for granted, right? In other words, we're so used to this, but think about the way it was the first day of the world, the first year, and how Adam Rishon would have felt. Amabi Kriv, so what did Adam Rishon do? Immediately brought a sacrifice. Now, from where did he bring a sacrifice? Specifically from Shor Shekarnav Kodmim Leparsotav, to a shore whose horns grew before his hooves. Okay, normally an ox is born with hooves, and then as time goes on, the horns grow. So the horns usually come later. But he took a shore that was created in the creation of the world. And in the creation of the world, just like Adam Rishon wasn't a baby, right? He was born fully grown. The animals were also born fully grown, and their horns came before their hooves. Okay, were created before their hooves, and he took an animal from Maaseh Bereshit and sacrificed it to God. Where do we get this idea from? So it says, Shneimar in Tehillim, there's the Tehillim which talks about I'm going to praise God with shirim, with songs and praises, and it's going to be even better, Vatetiv laHashem, it's going to be even greater from a shore par makrim mafris. And according to this midrash here, that's a reference to a shore. Notice in the pasuk, there's makrin, which is the keren, the horns, and mafris, which is the parsot, the hooves. And in the pasuk, the keren comes before the hooves. And what it's saying is that it's even better than the sacrifice that Adam Rishon brought way back when, from a shore whose horns came before their hooves. Okay, that's what they understand this pasuk to mean. But Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, here's a different explanation of that pasuk of what he sacrificed. It wasn't that the horns came before the hooves. It was that. Because either which way they're trying to say it was some unique creature. Shor shekriv Adam Rishon, keren achat hayta lo b'mitzcho. The shore was like a unicorn. It had one horn and not two horns. Shneimar v'tetiv laHashem yishor par makrim mafris, and they get it from this pasuk. So the Gemara asks, makrin, tarte mashma, what do you mean? Makrin sounds like it's plural. Where did you get that it has one horn? It sounds like it has two horns. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, makan ktiv. It has it without a yud. So from there it sounds like it's one keren. And because it sounds like one keren, they assume that that's what was unique about the shore that he sacrificed. Okay, so we have two possibilities, but what was unique about it, either which way, Adam Harishon brought a sacrifice to God once he realized on the second day after he was created, understood that God wasn't destroying the world. Amar Rav Matna. Okay, now we're back to, so that all explained Kalenda and Saturnalia, which were the holidays around the winter solstice, which had to do with the days that Adam Rishon prayed before and was fasting, and then the 8 days after of celebration. Amar Rav Matna, Romi shasta kalenda v'chol harayot hasmuchot la mishtabdot la otan hayot asurot umutarot. Now Rav Matna points out that the Romans, as we know, the Roman Empire, conquered all these nations, and they weren't all idol worshippers. So the question is, can we do business dealings with these other idol worshippers who are sort of keeping the holiday, but not really keeping it because they're worshiping idols, but they're keeping it because they're under the Roman rule. Now it could be the question is because, are they really keeping the holiday for the sake of Avodah Zarah or not? Or possibly it's since they're subjugated to the Romans, if we do business dealings with other people, it could be that our items that we're selling to them will get into the hands of the Romans also. We'll sell to someone, the Romans will force them to sell to them, and then the Romans will have our stuff and then they'll thank their gods on account of us. So it's a little more indirect, but perhaps that's the question. It's unclear exactly where the root of the question is. We're going to look at Rabbi Shov and Levi and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Shov and Levi Amal, Kalenda asura l'kolhi. It's forbidden to everybody. Can't do business with anyone. Rabbi Yochanan is lenient here. Amal and asura ela lo'ovdeha bilvad. Only to those who are actual idol worshippers. Tanya Kavateda Rabbi Yochanan. There's a braita to support him, and it's a bit of a long braita. Part of it's going to be very parallel to the Mishnah, or very similar to the Mishnah. Okay, not the beginning part. Romi asta kalenda v'chol arayot hasmuchot la mishtabdot la hi atzma ina asura ela le'ovdeha bilvad. Okay, so here you see exactly what we said. It's what Rabbi Yochanan said. It's only forbidden to those who worship idols. Saturnalia u'chatisim v'yom ginus shel malachim. Here the braita continues. V'yom shumlach bo melech lefanav asur charav mutal. I just want to check one thing. Okay. I was just looking at the footnote by there, but it's okay. Okay, so now we have these other holidays. Saturnalia, which is a bit of a different version of that same word we saw before in our Mishnah. Kratisim, the Yom Ginusi of the kings, the Yom Shumalach Bo Amelech, the day of the coronation of the king. Lifanav Asur Charav Mutal, before it's forbidden, but after is permitted. Ve'oved Kochavim Shasa Mishtel Lebeno, person does a suda for his son on his wedding. Ein Asur Elo To Yom Vo To Ish. And then comes Rav Ashi and says, Af Ananami Tanina. We also learn this from our Mishnah. Dekatane Yom Tigla. Okay, so basically, we started off with this braita supports Rabbi Yochanan, and then we kind of ended the braita with stuff that wasn't so relevant for our purposes because we already got what we wanted from the braita. It just then continued on a little bit about some other things in that braita, about the holidays, sounding very much like our Mishnah. Then Rav Ashi says you can also learn Rabbi Yochanan's opinion you can infer it from our Mishnah. This is not going to be as clear a proof as the Braita had a very clear proof, only Ovdeha, not anyone else. But we're going to try to derive it from our Mishnah as well. De Katani, it says, Yom tiglachatz kano blorito, v'yom shalabo minayam, v'yom shiatzabo mibet asurin, etc. Ein asur ela oto yom bevav v'oto ha'ish. Now notice what it says there. Only that person and only, that day. Bishlama oto hayom. So now the question is, why does it have to tell you that day and that person? Okay, what they're saying is each of those words is coming to exclude something. So bishlama oto hayom lafuke lefanav v'lacharav. Oto hayom means that day and not before it, not after, because the other things we learned were before and after. Ela oto ish lafuke mai. So why would you say oto ish? Like let's say a person is doing a meal for his son for his wedding. Why would you even think that it would include other people? Who else could potentially be included there? Lav lafuke mishua badav shmamina. It must be to include other people that are working for, subjugated to that person. And then they want you to know it's only that person, okay? Because again, totally obvious it's only that person. Well, you might have thought people who are subjugated to that person, maybe it would include them as well, and therefore it's telling you it doesn't. Shema mina. From there you can infer that we hold like Rabbi Yochanan, that just like this, we're like a comparison. Just like Otoa Ish and not anyone subjugated, also when it comes to the Roman holidays, just the Romans and not anyone subjugated to the Roman Empire or subjugated to the Romans. Tanya, Rabbi Yishmael Omer. Okay. Before we get here, I want to just give you some background. There's a sugya in Masechet Ketubot. I don't know if you remember this, but a very interesting sugya which compares wedding ceremonies to avelut, to mourning. Okay, and the same way in mourning, everyone's very familiar. There's 7 days. There's even there's the day of the death. There's 7 days. There's a month, 30 days, shloshim, and then there's a year. Okay, which is for parents. Now, in weddings, there's also significance. Okay, now most people know this. Significance of the day of the wedding, and then the 7 days, the Sheva brachot. But there's also halachot. We actually don't keep all of them, but halacha lamase. But in the Gemara, they talk about 30 days. If you, let's say, have a meal 30 days, within 30 days, you're supposed to say Shasimcha b'mono, the special zimun. And then up to a year, if you're celebrating the wedding, you're getting together for a wedding celebration, then you also do that special zimun bracha. Now, it happens halacha lamase. We don't necessarily pass in this way. Anyway, I'm not giving you halacha lamase, but I am just mentioning this. But there's this concept that, right, first of all, we do know Shana Rishona, there's all sorts of halachot about not going out to war, even though people do these days, but back then, it was this exemption from war for 7 days. Right? My daughter just got married and they immediately went right back to Army Miluim and all that. It's, all that's really out the window. But anyway, so we're going to talk now about a similar comparison in the world of the Gentiles. Okay, similar. Now, whether it's our reading, our understanding of the way we view it into them, or they also had this, it's a good question. Don't have the answer to that. It's a very interesting sugya. So Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Yisrael shebachutz laaretz, ovdei avodah zarah b'tahara. The Jews in Chutz Laaretz are ovdei avodah zarah b'tahara. What on earth does that mean? So the commentaries explain what they mean is bishkaga, like unwittingly. You end up without even really intending to be worshiping idols. How so? Well, Ketzad, and this has to do with what we talked about the Mishnah of Osem Shtel B'no. Ovei kochavim shasam shtel b'no v'zimein kol haYehudim shebeiro. So we have a Gentile who makes a wedding feast for his family, for his son, invites everybody in the community, including the Jews. Interesting to think about that they would do this. They had their own chef that would come and they would eat their own food and they would have shamash lehen made lifnehem. Okay, they had someone serving them. They ate all their own food. They weren't eating non-kosher or anything like that. This basically means it was like they worshipped idols. Okay, like they were eating from sacrifices of idols. Why? Shenema. Now, you have to read the beginning of this pasuk. It's in Shemot Lamed Daled, where it talks about don't make a brit, pentechor brit, liyoshvei haaretz, v'zanu acharei Elohem, v'zabchu leElohem. Okay, don't make a covenant with the people in the land. You're going to end up following their gods. V'kara lecha, they will call to you, v'achalta mizivcho, and you will eat from their sacrifices. So now they're going to say, even if you eat your own food, it's like eating from their sacrifices. Why? Shenemar v'kara lecha v'achalta mizivcho, from this pasuk. So they say, I don't understand. Maybe unless you eat. It sounds like, right? The pasuk says they'll call you and you'll eat from their sacrifices. That would be worshiping idols. But eating of your own food doesn't sound like it would be a problem. It would have just said that, and you'll eat from their sacrifices. Why does it say my bekara lecha? Why does it say they'll call to you and you'll eat from their sacrifices? Mishat kriya. From the moment they call you and invite you, that's already you're doing something wrong. So by you going to these wedding celebrations of Gentiles for their kids' weddings, you're basically, even if you're eating all your own kosher food, it's like you're worshiping idols. Hilkach, therefore, turning now to Amabed. Kol taltin yomi. Now we're going to get into the 30 days and the year and all that. Within 30 days of any wedding, bein amar le machmati lula, bein lo amar machmati lula, whether they said they're inviting you to a meal for the sake of the wedding or not for the sake of the wedding, asul. You can assume any meal within 30 days of the wedding is celebrating the wedding. And therefore, you can't participate in any meal with a Gentile within 30 days. Again, we're talking about idol worshippers. Mikam va'elach, after that, after that, if they invite you and say, we're celebrating our wedding, come join us, then it will be forbidden. If it's not a wedding celebration, then it's permitted. After 30 days, you already assume the default is it's not a wedding celebration. However, if they say it is, you cannot join. Now they want to know, well, where's the end time, right? Let's say they're celebrating their wedding, they invite you to a meal 2 years later. Is that a problem? Amar Papa, Ad Tracy Archashata, not a surprise. What does he say? 12 months. Again, whether the same thing existed in their in the Gentiles, in the Roman custom, maybe, um, or maybe the Jews are just reading our customs into the Gentile customs. Now the Gemara says, wait, we have two questions. First, Mikar me'emat asul. What's the earliest time? Right? Like an engagement party or something, right? But at what point do we say that if they invite you to a meal, it's celebrating their wedding? Amar Papa Mishmei de Rabba Michiramu Sare Asinte. It's when they put the barley in the basins to start soaking for making beer for the wedding. Okay, that's one interpretation. Rashi brings two interpretations. The other one I kind of liked. He said there's this custom, or at least according to this reading, they would plant some barley because barley grows very quickly, and then they would give the chatan and kala as a gift once the barley started sprouting. They would give it as a gift, and they would say, "Pru revu," right? You should multiply like these seolim, and that when they put the seolim, then they planted them for the purpose of giving it as a gift to the chatan and kala. That's the moment when you already can't go to a meal with them. So one or the other. Second question. After 12 months, it's permitted. We're going to have a story now where it was a problem even after a year. So Rav Yitzchak, the son of Rav Misharshia, gets to the guy's house after 12 months past his wedding, and then he heard the person thank their gods on account of the fact that Rav Yitzchak Bar Misharshia came to celebrate their wedding with them. Peirash velo achal, and he immediately went off to the side and wouldn't eat. So what do you see here? Even after a year, it's a problem. It's for a wedding celebration. So Shani Rav Yitzchak, Rav Misharshia, the Adam Chashuv. So now they say, well, he was a prominent person, and that's different. Now, what does this mean? Some people say he was a prominent person, and because of that, the person was so excited that he was there to celebrate his wedding with him, even though it was more than a year later. It was just such an exciting, happy occasion for him. That's why it was a problem for him. Okay, but for a regular person, you wouldn't be so excited if they came a year plus after your wedding to celebrate with you. Again, it wasn't clear to Rabbi Yitzchak, that's why he was there to celebrate with him, or I don't know, maybe it was. The second option is he was an Adam Chashuv and people learn from him. So therefore he had to be extra, right? When you're in a position of prominence, sometimes you have to be extra careful about things because people will, maybe they wouldn't do the count and they would see, oh, you were there at and the person was happy that you were at the wedding celebration. And even though it was beyond the time, maybe they wouldn't know it was beyond a year and people would learn a lesson from there. And maybe because of that, he needs to be extra careful. Now we're moving on to the next holiday, Kratisi. My Kratisim, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Yom Shetafsa bo Romi Malchut. The day the Romans took over, okay, conquered. Batanya Kratisim v'Yom Shetafsa bo Romi Malchut. But wait, in a Braita it lists these as two different things. How could you say Kratisim is the day that they became, the rulers? It says Kratisim and the day they became the rulers in a different Braita, as if these are two different things. Rav Yosef, shtei tfisot tafsa Romi. Echad b'yemei Kalapatra Malkata. One in the days of Cleopatra, who was the queen of Egypt, and one in the days where they conquered the Greeks. So in the Koran, there's a footnote that claims, again, it's clear that they're giving a conjecture here, but that actually the Cleopatra happened much later and the Greeks was much earlier, that the Greeks were around 190 BCE when conquering, they attributed to this one particular battle, the conquering against Antiochus III, and the ones with Cleopatra is Cleopatra the seventh, and it's when they conquered the Egyptians in the year 30 CE. Okay, so it's a little bit strange order according to this. You would think they first mentioned the earlier one and then the later one. It's actually flipped. Anyway, this is conjecture when these things happen, but we can go with what they say there. Now we're going to learn about the conquering of the Romans of the Greeks. And here, okay, and Shuli talks about this well, how the Jews kind of write themselves into history here. Okay, we don't know the facts, what really happened, but we're going to claim that their conquering of the Greeks was on account of the Jews joining them and having a pact with them and helping them out. So again, take it as it is. So the Chiyata Rav Dimi Amal. Rav Dimi came from Israel. He explained. There were 32 battles the Romans waged against the Greeks, and they couldn't conquer them. Until the Jews joined forces with them. And this is the pact that they made. The Romans kind of put a condition, right, and said, if we rule, then we'll be the rulers and you'll be the governors. If you become the kings, minan hiparchi, we'll be the governors. In other words, we're going to rule together, but one will be under the other. And then the Romans sent to the Greeks the following. Until now, we've been fighting you physically and not succeeding. Hashda navid bedina. Now we're going to get you. We're going to have a verbal debate. We're going to engage in debates. It's a very interesting theory. Now, the Jews, I think also this concept of battle of wits is a good way to say it. This concept of the Jews kind of having the wit, right? The Jews are considered the smart, right? We're not exactly the most physical strong, but we are good when it comes to these arguments, and certainly in the Gemara all the time, right? With especially with the Pulmusim, with the Christians and the heretics and all that. So here goes the argument they gave them. Margalit ve'evan tova. If you have a pearl and a precious jewel, which one will be the base for the other? Meaning, which is the less significant one, which is the base, and the more significant one, which will sit on the base. The pearl will be the base for the precious jewel. If you have a precious jewel and an inach, I think someone can remind me, is it a sapphire maybe? I don't know if you can help me with English, I forget exactly. Oh no, an onyx, that's what it is. An inach is an onyx, I just remembered. So each time we're going to have, right, the previous one, the precious jewel, will be a base for the onyx. Inach v'sefer Torah, an onyx and the sefer Torah, which one will be a base for the other? Inach l'sefer Torah. The onyx will be a base for the sefer Torah. Shalchule. So now they send back to them. The Romans say, Im ken anan sefer Torah gaban. The sefer Torah is with us. The Israel gaban, we have the Jews with us. And kafaluhu, and they were able to subjugate them underneath the Romans. And for 26 years, they kept their pact with the Jews and they ruled together. But we know the sad ending of the story, right? Obviously, we end up being subjugated under the Romans. And from after those 26 years, that was it. We became subjugated to the Romans, right? Leading obviously to the destruction of the temple and all that. Mikara my darish to my darish. So now they have to understand why the Romans at first think they would go with us and then after decide to subjugate us. Well, Mikara darish, we're going to go back to the famous Yaakov and Esav encounter, right? When they in Parsha Vayishlach, when they come together. So we're going to quote psukim from there. And it's interesting that they're going to quote Esav in the beginning as basically saying, let's go together. And then they're going to quote Yaakov, who basically admits that Esav is going to lead. Okay, so drush, which is ironic. Okay, let's go together. And I'll go linegdecha, which means opposite you, which means side by side. That's what Esav says to Yaakov, and that's what they thought in the beginning. Uleva self-darish, right? Because remember, Esav is right. Rome is Esav, descends from Esav, Edom. Uleva self-darish, yavorna adoni lifnei avdo. What Yaakov says to Esav is, you should go first. To go first obviously means you're going to lead. And so now we get to this question, and we're not going to find the answer until tomorrow's daf. Okay, so we have a little long, you can see already there's more to the stuff, even though we're not going to get to this answer right away. But the 26 years where they ruled with the Jews, where do we get this from? This 26 years. So now we're going to quote this statement. Amar Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana tells us, when Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi was sick, they sent him, Rebbe. And more than we want to hear before you die. Tell us 2 or 3 things you learned from your father, Rabbi Yossi. Amar lehu. So he says to them, 180 years before the temple was destroyed, the Romans conquered Israel. 80 shana ad shelo charav habayit gazru tumah al eretz hamim v'klei zchuit. We're basically going chronologically, 180 years before the destruction. 80 years before the destruction, then we're going to get to 40 years before the destruction. 80 years they decided, okay, and this was all Sugya Masechet Shabbat, we're not going to get back into all the details, but 80 years before, they decided that all land outside of Israel is tameh because they'd already been tameh, Gentile bones and all that, and flesh. And therefore, they said, right, like any burial spots are Tame Maga Masa. There's a whole debate, maybe all in some way, but we're going to go with Maga Masa by touching it. And therefore, since the Gentiles bury in all sorts of places, and they don't only bury in cemeteries, but there could be bodies anywhere, they said all of Chutz La'aretz is Metame. So anywhere you go in Eretz, Chutz La'aretz, you become Tameh. And Kles Chuchit. And any glass vessels are also tameh. This is because the Torah doesn't talk about glass vessels in the list of what vessels become impure. They also did Gezerah on that. We're not going to get into right now why, all that. That's a Masechet Shabbat. Arba'im shana ad shelo charav habayit, 40 years before, and this is the one we're going to deal with today. Galta Sanhedrin v'yashva b'chanut. The Sanhedrin left the Lishkat HaGazit and moved to Chanut, which was in Har HaBayit, but not in the Lishkat HaGazit where it was. So now, Lemai Hilchita, why are they telling us this? What's the relevant halacha of the Sanhedrin having moved? Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, we're going to have two answers. The first one we're going to reject. But Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi says, Lamar shelo danu dinei knasot. They didn't do knasot. They didn't have fines, the kefel, all that we've talked about. No fines. Dinei knasot sakadatach. Wait, you think there were no fines? Of course there were. V'hamar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rab, Baram zachor to aish l'tov. Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba Shmo. We've learned this story already, but we'll review it for those also who are new to the daf. So Yehuda ben Baba, who was one of the 10 Harugei Malchut, who the Romans killed brutally, we're going to hear about his death in this story. Because of him, we'd still have Dinei Knasot. So now they say, Shalom Alehu, if it weren't for him, Nishtakhu Dinei Knasot Yisrael. They would have been forgotten completely. So they stop from it and they say, wait a minute, Nishtakhu, how could they have been forgotten? Ligrasinu, if they were forgotten. So go back and relearn them. Like something you can always get back. Ela batlu Dinei Knasot Yisrael. They would have been completely canceled because the only way you can deal with Dinei Knasot is if you have smicha. And if it weren't for Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, there'd be nobody left with smicha anymore. But he saved the day, and because of that, they were able to do Dinei Knasot, which goes to reject what Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi said, that they didn't do Dinei Knasot because the Sanhedrin moved. That's not true. Okay, now we're going to hear from the story. The Romans had a Gezerah. Anyone who gives smicha will be killed. Anyone who gets smicha will be killed. Right, again, we're talking about smicha for the Rabbanit to be a rabbi. A city where they do smicha will be destroyed. Even the tchum outside the city will be uprooted. So Ma'asara Yehuda ben Bava halach v'yashav. So what did he do to resolve this issue? Halach v'yashav ben shnei arim gdolim. We went between two mountains. Ben shnei ayarot gdolah, between two cities, two big cities. Ben shnei tchumei Shabbat, between two tchum Shabbat. Basically, he made sure he wasn't near a city, not near a tchum, not near anything, so they wouldn't destroy the cities or the tchum. Ben Usha l'Shfar'am, that's where he was geographically. The space was somewhere between Usha and Shfar'am. V'samach sham chamishas kenim, and he gave smicha to 5 kenim. Somech today to remember this spot. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamoah, very famous rabbis, got smicha from him at that moment in time. Rav Avia, Mosifa for Rabbi Nechemia. Rav Avia says also Rabbi Nechemia was one of them. Kevan shikiru behem oivim, the oivim found them. Amar lem, he said to them, Banai rutsu, listen, you run. I'm too old, I can't run. Amrula Rebbe, what's going to be with you? I'm just going to be like a rock that no one can turn over. Okay, there's different meanings what exactly that means, but we'll just keep going. And he basically said, I'm just going to stay here. They speared it with 300 iron spears. It was basically, he looked like a sieve. He had so many holes in his body. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, lo tema dinei knasot. So now we have to go back, right? So he saved the day by doing this and lost his life in the process. Very tragic story. But he was able to save the future of the Jewish people, at least in terms of dinei knasot, right? Not to say these people wouldn't have been rabbis, but it was a big deal that he did this. Then, so Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, okay, fine, not dinei knasot, ela shelo danu dinei nefashot. They didn't do capital punishment, because even though you could do capital punishment in the courts of 23, you don't need the big court in the Sanhedrin. However, if the court is not in the Sanhedrin, you're not allowed to do dinei nefashot. Now here we're going to see something that really leaves open a lot of room for thought, what exactly this means. But my time, why did they want to stop doing dinei nefashot? Since there were tons of murderers and they couldn't judge them. Some people say this is like Herod and all that with all the killings that were going on and all his people that were killing, and they couldn't judge them. Now, why couldn't they judge them? Maybe it was too many people to judge. Maybe it was that the Romans were in charge and wouldn't let the Jews judge Dine Nefashot, right? They kind of said, you're under us and you can't do your own court. We don't know exactly why, what it means they couldn't judge them. So אמרו מוטב נגלה ממקום למקום, כי הכי דלא לחייבו, דכתיב עשית על פי הדבר אשר יגידו לך מן המקום הוא, ולמד שהמקום גורם. So let's start from the end. Like I said, the makom is gorem. You have to, only if you're in the Sanhedrin, in the makom asher yivchar, as it says in the pasuk, right? You have to do by what they tell you in that place, which is the Lishkat Gazit. As soon as the Sanhedrin's not there, you can't do that. So what they did was they wanted to kind of remove themselves from being responsible by doing this, right? They said, well, if we can't do it because we're outside the temple, right? We're not sitting in the temple in the Lishkat Gazit, so then we won't be able to do it, and that will basically exonerate us from responsibility, since anyway we can't judge them. Now, again, why they can't judge them is not 100% clear, but you can think about this till tomorrow. So what did we do today? We started with this whole issue of adding in your own personal tefillah, where you do that, in which part of tefillah, beginning, end, or in the end, like in the middle somewhere. Then we went to what are the holidays of these Gentiles? What is the source of the holidays? Where they come from, right? The Adam Rishon story about the winter ones. And then we got to the one about the victory of the Romans, which according to us, we had something to do with, right? That it was because they joined the Jews that enabled them, at least one of them, to conquer the Greeks, right? We also said there was one to conquer the Egyptians. And when they conquered the Egyptians. And then from there, we got to this, this 26 years, which we're still trying to figure out how we know for 26 years we were in a pact with the Romans before they subjugated us. And with that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day and a Chodesh Tov.